Well, with that, it seems like it's 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock is my other meeting. And welcome to Know Before You Grow, a subcommittee of Petaluma Urban Chat. I'm Dan Like because I drew the short straw. And thank you, as always, to Dave Alden and Sharon Kirk and the host of other people who put this series of events together. A few housekeeping notes before we go further. One is that we have been Zoom bombed in the past. We will likely be Zoom bombed in the future. If the screen goes weird and people start playing strange music or something, I will get to that person and kick them as fast as I can. And yeah, just hold on the line and we'll be there. Another is that because of that, if you're joining late and your name isn't one that I recognize, please either answer my queries to you in the chat room or find somebody else to vouch for you. With that out of the way, we also may have people who are elected or appointed to public office. And because of that, there's something called the Brown Act, which is the Sunshine Law, which says that they can't have conversations outside of public meetings more than a quorum. It's a complicated thing, but the net result of that is if you are aware of the Brown Act, or if you are subject to the Brown Act, make sure that you know the other people or that there are other people in the same situation on this. And if you are a meeting participant and note that somebody is there and they're not speaking up, not saying anything, that could be why. So public officials are welcome to not say much. We're also going to continue the trend of keeping the chat just to me. I will collate the messages or the questions for the panel and introduce them at the appropriate time and generally try to keep control over things. A few notes about upcoming meetings. We have, oh dear, there we go. Tonight is the general plan series continuing with affordable housing. Next Monday, we have the Sustainable Urbanism Book Club. So if you're reading Doug Farr's Sustainable Urbanism with us, we'll be moving through chapters 5 through 7. On Wednesday, December 15th, we have the general plan series continuing with urban growth boundaries. On Thursday, December 23rd, we're going to have our monthly agenda-free gathering at noon at Aquas. On Wednesday, January 12th, we've got discussion of the missing middle housing. Wednesday, January 26th, we're going to introduce you to strong towns and talk about municipal finances. In preparation for on February 9th, we're going to have Chuck Marone, who's the founder of Strong Towns and author of a new book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, will be speaking with us via Zoom. We've had him in a long time ago, teleconferenced in for at that point, Petaluma Urban Chat meeting. And we're looking forward to having him come back around again. With that, I will go into the background and deal with the technical stuff and put myself on mute and hand the meeting over to Allie. Allie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for all of those important housekeeping updates. Let me get my presentation queued up and share my screen. I hope you all see a very fancy PowerPoint. Hi, everybody. I'm Allie Gaylord, Director of Housing Development for MidPen North Bay office. MidPen is a 50-year-old nonprofit housing developer, owner, manager, and resident services provider. And we work throughout the Bay Area, and I personally head up the Santa Rosa office. So I work locally on developments in Petaluma, Santa Rosa, and other locations throughout the North Bay. I'm super excited to be presenting to Know Before You Grow tonight on one of my favorite topics, which is affordable housing. And I'm even more excited that Rick Williams, principal for award-winning design and planning firm Van Meter, Williams & Pollack, is here to present on housing affordability, sustainability, and economic equity with some real engaging real-world case studies that will show housing finance and policies in action. Rick has an extensive background in architecture and urban design, and I'm lucky enough to have gotten to work with him over the years on a number of affordable housing developments, including one that he'll be talking about later that's located in Santa Rosa that we're currently working on. Plus, a fun fact, Rick is also a ref for kids soccer, so you might see him around the soccer fields and the sports complex when he's not busy doing design work. So big thanks for Rick for being available tonight and to share his thoughts. And I'll just go through kind of some broader topics before we jump in and before he gets to his presentation. So okay, that's Rick and me. I'm a lot more blonde now. Hopefully everyone knows. So the overview. So I'll be talking about types of housing affordability, housing finance, lots of jargon. I'll go into a little bit about the difference between financing market rate, financing affordable, and financing inclusionary housing, and then how state and local policies can encourage housing development. And then I'll finish with a recap of our MidPen development called 414 Petaluma that will illustrate some of the concepts on a site here in town. Then I'll pass it over to Rick to give his perspectives on the different types of housing and the real life analysis that goes into determining what actually gets built. So what exactly is meant by affordable housing? It's useful to start off with a few definitions just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And in case you want to delve further into jargon definition territory, please visit a great resource that I have listed here on the bottom of the page, which is the Generation Housing Glossary of Housing Terms. I'm a board member for Generation Housing and also encourage you to check out their advocacy work in bringing more infill development to Sonoma County. So the definitions, let's start with affordable housing with big A. So affordable housing means deed restricted housing, typically funded using subsidies and using the low-income housing tax credit. The tax credit was a tax program created in the 1980s to provide incentives for private sector production of low-income housing. And this enables developers of affordable housing like MidPen to raise equity through the sale of tax benefits to investors. Investors receive 10 years of tax credits in exchange for their investment. And this is a very important source of equity for nonprofits. It makes up about 55% of the capital stack in each one of our projects. The program requires a certain percentage of homes to be restricted for occupancy for households earning 60% or less of the area median income, and the rents on those units have to be restricted accordingly. And these projects are often funded with multiple sources of state and local funding, and they carry long-term, like 55-year plus deed restrictions that require the operator to rent to residents that meet the strict income definition. And then affordable housing with a little a is a general term typically used by people to indicate that renters or owners are not what we call cost burdened, which means they're not paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Workforce housing is maybe a newer term or a term that has gotten more popular in the recent years. That's housing that typically serves folks in the 60 to the 120% area median income level. So these are households who may not qualify for the lower income housing of the tax credit program, or may not qualify for rental subsidy like Section 8, which are the two major programs for addressing housing financing needs. So some avenues that you may see addressing workforce housing are land trusts, like the Housing Land Trust of Sonoma County, inclusionary ordinance targeting workforce income ranges, or accessory dwelling units could also be an avenue. And then affordable by design is another kind of informal definition, which is housing that costs less because they're small and efficiently designed. In many cases, they don't come with a parking space or they have reduced parking. And this can be thought of as supplemental to the other housing types and kind of just ensures housing affordability across the spectrum of income. And inclusionary requirements are the requirements of developers to include a certain percentage of below market rate homes in their development. So Petaluma has an inclusionary ordinance that was adopted in 2018 that requires on-site affordable development in projects of 5 or more units. And it's set at 15% of units in the project. And then that 15% is broken out to 15 or to 7.5% to very low income, which is below 50% of area median, and then 7.5% to low income households for 55 years. And ownership has its own requirement, which is 7.5 to low and 7.5 to moderate income for 45 years. Often those inclusionary ordinances require certain things of the developer, like concurrent construction of the market and the affordable unit. They often require the units to be distributed throughout the project, and that the units of the affordable and the market rate are comparable. And this is the case in Petaluma. There can be alternative compliance that the developer can request. So fulfilling their inclusionary obligation in a different way, like giving a land donation to the city or to a nonprofit, or by paying a fee in lieu of constructing the actual inclusionary unit. Another kind of on the wonky side, not as if this hasn't been so far, but naturally occurring affordable housing is another term that you may have heard. Generally, that's understood to mean rental housing that's at least 2 decades old, lower on amenities, and affordable without a subsidy. So this kind of naturally affordable housing doesn't have a deed restriction. It could be sold and rent could be increased when improvements are made to the building. So these are privately held, and they actually present an opportunity for acquisition by localities or nonprofits to preserve the affordability by placing a deed restriction on the property at acquisition. In my role at MidPen, I actually worked on an acquisition of this type in the city of Fairfield earlier this year, where we acquired a 36-unit apartment complex where Solano County provided some of the funding for the acquisition costs, and in return placed a 55-year deed restriction on the entire property that limited the rentals to folks who make 80% or less of the area median income. So we were able to add actually to the affordable housing stock by purchasing that building. And then housing land trust, I already referred to it in a previous definition, but that's usually for sale product, allows folks to purchase homes with the land trust retaining title to the land and then doing a long-term ground lease to the homeowner. So that provides resale value to the homeowner while limiting their equity and ensuring that the home will be affordable to future low or moderate income purchasers. So housing finance. The financing mechanisms of market rate, affordable, and inclusionary are related, but they have some very different nuances to them. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the kind of structure and some of the no-go or no-go decisions. And I think Rick is also going to elaborate a bit in his presentation. But kind of market rate is fairly straightforward. Market rate developers base projects on investment return. So they only build when projects pencil out, which is when revenues or market value exceeds the project cost and creates an investment return. Investment required return. Developers can't attract necessary project funding if the investment return is not competitive. So the required investment return varies based on project risk. And one thing you'll hear kind of often is the greater certainty reduces risk, so requires less investment return. So that in the sum of the costs, meaning the hard cost, land value, soft cost, and investment return to the developer must be equal, or else the housing will be not built. So just a no-go decision. For affordable housing, deed restricted tax credit projects typically include 100% low income affordable units. And they're typically targeted to extremely low, very low, and low income households. There is kind of necessarily a gap, is what we call, in the market value versus the cost to construct and develop the housing, because the affordable housing doesn't charge market rate rent. And that gap between the value and market rate rent is the competitive resources and subsidies that the low-income housing tax credit can fill, or that local and state funding can fill to close that gap and fund the cost of those developments. And then inclusionary housing generates the below market rental or for sale homes. And it can be a real benefit because this is a developer funded source of affordable housing. Also, as I was mentioning before, localities can set their policies locally, so they can target what kind of income levels are important to the community goals. There are some challenges, including that the inclusionary units generate lower than market rate rent. So there can be downward pressure on that market value, and it makes it harder for these developments to pencil if they're not kind of hitting the sweet spot. Gap sources, like I was referring to in the affordable housing financing, aren't really available for these inclusionary units. So it's really about hitting that balance of where that market value is versus the development cost to get to the kind of go or no go decision for the inclusionary folks. So through better housing policies, we can improve health and education outcomes, fuel our economy, and protect our local landscape, and move closer to achieving a sustainable low carbon future. And you may have heard about some of these policies because they are, have been really hot in the state legislature lately. And so I'm just going to go through a few that might be of interest to folks. The density bonus, that has been around a while and has traditionally been up to 35% increase in density, plus waivers and concessions to developers. Recently, I guess more recently, in 2019 and 2020, there have been additional density bonus incentives for 100% affordable housing projects that include an option for an 80% density bonus or an unlimited density bonus for projects within a half a mile of a major transit stop. The SB 35 streamlined housing approval is an approval process that cuts out on some public approvals, public meetings that housing projects would otherwise have to go through, thereby streamlining and kind of removing the risk and increasing certainty for developers, which saves time, saves money, and lowers the requirement for the investment premium that developers have to kind of charge on their financing that they're seeking, or pay on the financing that they're seeking. And another ability for housing policies to further goals are by aligning funding requirements for state funding with housing goals and climate goals of the state. For instance, there is a program called the Sustainable Housing Communities Grant that is targeted really for housing and transit projects that lower VMTs. So that is a way that we're using funding to encourage the kind of right type of development. Same thing with transit-oriented development and targeted funding to special needs populations like homeless, veterans, and those who are mentally ill. There's been a new focus in the past few years by the state of targeting what they're called high and highest resource areas based on areas of kind of higher opportunity, higher health and education outcomes, where they'd like low income housing to be located in order to kind of give the folks that live in the low income housing a kind of a better access to higher quality services. So I think we'll see a lot more unfold about that policy in particular in the next couple of years. And so the 414 Petaluma Boulevard project is one that I would like to touch on just quickly. This is MidPen's project just north of downtown. It is 0.6 acres in the central Petaluma specific plan area. And it's a pretty small site. We're going to be constructing 44 units there. And it's a very interesting site and it has some challenges. Not only is it small, about a third of the buildable area is covered with utility easements or buried utility lines that can't be built on. The ground has is a little bit destabilized, so we have to do some special soil improvement programs there. And so it was really imperative on us about how to try and get the housing that the city wanted and really reach the goals there to try and fit this all on this site. And so we talked with the city and the planning department and really asked kind of what they could see there. And we heard that there was a real need. I think every city has this needing to meet their RHNA obligations for very low and extremely low income and housing the homeless. So that's what we turned our focus to and started assembling our funding through the city, through the county, and through their alignment of goals of serving very low and low income folks and homeless residents. We were able to align funding in order to go compete at the state level and win allocation of tax credits. And the tax credits were pretty special because they were allocated to Sonoma County specifically because of the fires that we experienced in 2019. So this was a way that the state was able to help kind of get a jump on replacing housing that was lost during the disasters. And we additionally were able to get some funding for setting aside some units for farm workers, which is also really important in this area and is a huge generator of economics for Sonoma County. Also locating the site or the housing here, which is a site that's located very close to transit, parks, grocery stores, host of amenities is super important in order to lower our VMTs and ensure that people are walking and biking instead of driving cars. And so we will be starting construction on this development in March or April of next year, and we're looking forward to that very much. So now I'd like to pass it over to Rick and, oops, I'm going backwards. I just need to, there we go. I'm gonna pass this back over to Rick and he will share some of the best practices to ensure the creation of sustainable design solutions that address climate resilience and social and economic equity, and give us a lot of great case studies. Thanks, Rick.
Great, thanks a lot, Allie. That's really fantastic. I always like to get more on the education relative to how things are funded, because I find that that's always the biggest challenge. If they can get the sites, if we can get the funding, I don't want to say that the architecture part of it is easy, but it seems to be something that we can get through. I've been an architect now for 40 years. I've been working in Marin almost my whole life and living in Marin from Novato to San Rafael, where I live now. I did have about 15 years in Oakland, but we're working on projects from Mill Valley up to Healdsburg currently. And we feel that this area really has a great potential for creating additional affordable housing for each community up and down 101 and the SMART train. Are you guys seeing images as well, or just the or just the slides?
I'm just seeing the slide.
Perfect. So when we are evaluating a project, we are typically looking at it from a variety of different standpoints. We're looking at the town and community itself and their policies and their kind of value systems, and whether or not they're supportive of infill housing developments, or if there's a hypersensitivity to the neighbors, et cetera. Our clients are looking at that as well as they're selecting sites. If they are really in support of infill apartments, or are they in support of single family home developments? We do predominantly affordable housing and infill development regulations ourselves. But oftentimes developers are looking at either a for sale project or a rental. Many of them don't do both. There are developers that do single family homes, there are developers that do townhouses, there are developers that do apartments, and a few do all three, but most have their own focus. And then when you're thinking of apartments, they typically want larger projects for efficiency and management. The 40-unit development in Petaluma is, I think, MidPen and others would say, is really on the small side, and they typically would love it to be 50 units, but sometimes that's just not possible. But 50 is usually the sweet spot. There are very few small apartment developers. They've almost disappeared. You don't see many apartment buildings that are 10 and 20 units like you used to see in the 70s and 80s. They're just not around anymore. And mostly it's because the small projects tend to be small infill, single family or townhome projects. If it's for sale also, the developers kind of get in and get out, and they don't have to worry about, is it going to rent for the next 20 years? So for sale is easier also to gain support for. So oftentimes in a community that has very sensitive to development, that pushes the densities down, not up. So they may say they really want affordable housing, but the way they react to the neighborhood opposition oftentimes pushes the densities down, and a developer sometimes needs to take a path of relatively least resistance. And then they might even look at, well, is it worth it to do more units and do a condo project versus a single family home? And the liabilities around those actually create a lot of issues. And so many developers don't want to do condominiums. Many architects don't want to do condominiums. And so only usually in a high value community will they really be able to attract high-end condos and take the risk of that 10-year opening for litigation. Let's see if I can move. So I'm going to run through a couple of examples and kind of show you how our clients thought of this. And this is a small development in Novato, so it's not very far away. It was an infill development which had single family, very small 900 square foot homes across the street. It was a vacant site that had apartments all around it, as you can see. And we evaluated it for both apartments and small lot single family for sale. The zoning allowed for about 20 units, but the parking was a very high parking ratio and would require about 50 parking spaces. And that would make for a very big building, and the community in our first meeting was very opposed to the apartments, even though there were apartments all throughout the other side of the street. And the city was hoping that we could do a smaller project as well. It also, the 20 units also triggered affordable requirements that made the project less feasible. And then you had to park parking, you had to look at it as a podium or a tuck under project. So it added a lot of costs to the project. And that 50 spaces, if it was a podium, would be $3 million. And if it was surface parking, it would be $600,000. So you can see how parking drives a lot of a project's analysis. Well, the other thing I mentioned was that, you know, you can get in and out of a single family development pretty quickly. And you can, if you hit the right timing, the cost of the building versus and the soft costs, and then the value of the sale can get you that rate of return, which oftentimes wants to be, at least on a big project, 20%, 25%, the developers will tell you, but might be even greater, even though it's a smaller development. So density, even though you're asking for it oftentimes, doesn't always mean more value associated with the project. So, and a development. This is an interesting project because it's now been built. Irony was we got it entitled, and this shows you why there's risk associated with these projects. The developer ended up not being able to complete the project because of a recession being hit 2007, 2008. They ended up selling the land to the city. And then the city took the entitlements, gave it to Habitat for Humanities, and Habitat for Humanities ended up building the development. And so it's there today, not quite exactly as we designed it, because Habitat has some of their own housing standards, but basically the same site plan and the same basic fundamental idea and the same number of units. They just took 3 years to build it. But it was, I think of it as a success, but the private developer that was thinking as they went through the investment of entitling it had really hoped to make money on the project. And because of the recession, he had to get out of the project. So it became affordable in another way. This is a project in Petaluma, which we've studied for other case studies for other projects. But one of the things it illustrates is, and you all probably know this project pretty well on Baywood Drive, but you can see how hard the developers work to get in all the parking that's either required or they feel the market needs. But they try very hard to do it without doing a parking podium, because the parking podium costs a lot of money. It changes the cost of parking substantially, as I noted in the previous analysis. And parking spaces go from $15,000 to $20,000 a space up to $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 a space. So parking drives the economic equation on many of these projects. And this is why Petaluma is not seeing a substantial amount of the high density development, because you generally have fairly high parking ratios, or the market, even if the city isn't requiring high parking ratios, the market in Petaluma is asking for a fairly high parking ratio. And then it costs a lot of money to build structured parking, and a lot of it. So that's why you're not seeing a lot of your podium developments, even if they get approvals, move forward. So that's kind of two examples of the market rate housing. When we're looking at a development for affordable housing, we're also looking to see if the city supports affordable housing. Our clients are looking to see if they have housing funds available so that they can help with pre-development funding, or helping purchasing the site, or putting some dollars towards it. As Ali mentioned, the amenities, being close to a grocery store, particularly being near quality transit, if you're within 15-minute headways, good schools, all of those are important aspects that we look at while we initially look at a site. Also the zoning. How many units can we get on the site, and is it by right, can we get to that 50 unit sweet spot? And if we can't get there, can we get a do we have to do a general plan amendment and rezoning on it, or can we use a density bonus to achieve those units? And this may be a little outdated number, but I've often heard the terms, heard looking at, can you get the land for somewhere in the $50,000 to $75,000 per door as a reasonable cost for a site, not just for getting the site, for how many units you can fit on it. So they call it on a per door basis, the land value. But there's range on that, and that changes whether you're in Petaluma, Santa Rosa, Windsor, or San Jose. But again, that 50 unit sweet spot is really important. So I wanted to show you our clients. Allie will call me up and say, hey, I'm looking at this site. Can you take a quick look at it and tell me if I can get a certain number of units on the site? And so this is literally the first drawing of a project that I kept for historic value. And I said, well, what's the zoning? I looked at the analysis of it. I said, what's the zoning? Do you want it to be family or senior? How many units can I fit on the site for the existing zoning and the density? Hey, with the density bonus, I can get 61 units. I've got a creek on the right-hand side, and I have a 50-foot setback. Part of it's in a floodplain. That's why it's a remnant site that's been vacant for, well, everything else around it's been built out. I've got some apartments, which actually ended up being condominiums, bad first analysis. And I knew that they wouldn't want the building right up against them. And I knew the fire department, which drives much of our site planning these days, would want to be able to get to the back of the site to fight a fire and also be able to turn around. So this was literally the first sketch that we did on a project to see whether or not this project could get built and how many parking spaces we would need and how tall it would be and would it fit within the zoning and what the general cost of it would be. And so we did all of that and then looked at it and they said, yeah, we think we can make this work. And they purchased the property with a special deal with the landowner. And this is how it fits within the community. It's actually built. And this is a senior housing development in Novato on Diablo Avenue. I would love to do a project in my backyard, but I put it in my mom's backyard. This is about 3 blocks from my mom's house. And after 8 years of being on the waiting list, being number 754 on the waiting list, my mother-in-law actually just moved in the January before the pandemic. And you can see the courtyard, the open space, the landscaping along the front, the gardens that took over some of the parking spaces we didn't need. And it's 3 stories and it's considered a pretty good success in the community. But we literally, that first diagram ended up getting built, which isn't always the case, but it addressed many of the issues. And probably because I grew up in Novato and I knew the site, I knew what most of the issues were, and we were able to successfully deal with it. But podium developments are challenged, but they're definitely an interesting building type. And if you can keep the parking ratios low, such as something like 1-to-1 parking per unit, you can really gain a lot of benefit. So this is a site that, and also I just want to note that many affordable housing developments don't get the choice sites. These end up being sites that nobody else wants to develop. They're remnant sites, they're old retail centers, they're strip shopping centers, or in this case, when they redid the freeway, it created a remnant site that was given from Caltrans to the city of Albany. And they said, well, we need affordable housing, so maybe we'll cut out an acre of land and see if we can get a affordable housing development on this site. It didn't have any zoning originally. It was dedicated in their housing element. And so we worked with the city to zone the property. It was in their general plan. And then we were able to use that SB 35 to expedite an approval process. But we did it as a kind of a friendly SB 35 where we designed the building, we worked with the city, we had community meetings, and we worked out all the details, almost like a regular process, but we never had to go to the Planning Commission and City Council for approval. And it worked out well, and that's a collaborative process, which ended up being one-to-one parking. We have the same number, basically, units as we have parking spaces. It's a family development that's 3 stories over the podium. Most of the building looks like it's 3 stories, except for the street edge away from the neighborhood. One of the other aspects of family housing is 50% of the housing has to be 2 and 3 bedrooms, 25% each. So you have to have the right mix. It can't be mostly ones, but you can have up to that 50% number. So it's a tight site, but it's right next to a park, and it was a good site at the edge of the neighborhood. But because of its location next to the freeway, we have to spend more money on acoustics, air quality, ventilation, and a lot of other aspects that added some cost to the project. It's getting funded, and we're in construction documents, and we're going to be moving forward with this project. So it shows an example of working very closely with the city. It's a podium development. If we had to have 1.5 or 2 parking spaces per unit, we would have never been able to build this project. It just wouldn't have happened. It would have had to be a site that was twice as large, and it wouldn't have made sense. I also want to mention that cities and states have a lot of good policies which actually make affordable housing more costly. And we've really been at the cutting edge of sustainability with affordable housing. The whole idea of exceeding Title 24 for financing purposes and getting a basis boost for being 10 or 15% above Title 24 or energy conservation was all created first through policies for funding affordable housing. And then it kind of got translated to private development and LEED and Greenpoint rated certification. But now some of the struggles we have is we're moving towards all electric buildings, which creates additional cost, which is very good for solar panels that will be a long-term payoff. But one of the things that some cities are doing is saying, well, gee, we should do all electric vehicle charging stations. And the problem with that is it's creating a huge transformer and a lot of additional cost for the developments themselves. And at this point, at least, we don't have the need for that many electric vehicle charging stations on site for the residents that most frequently have some fairly old vehicles. Small sites require structured parking, which costs 4 times greater. The big sites attract the desires of the market rate developers. So we're usually trading off small sites and land value for structured parking. But it really is an impetus that means that we need to have lower and lower parking ratios. So we need to have those small sites located near transit so that we can support lower parking ratios. Everybody loves mixed use development. I really enjoy doing mixed use projects, but that mixed use can't be subsidized through low income housing tax credits. So that's a real challenge because you can't even take the income from the rent from a shop or a business that would be in a mixed use building and put it towards the housing, and they don't get to count that. So it's a drag on the housing development. So there needs to be other ways of financing those spaces. I mentioned that we often are looking at private developments that where private developments have overlooked the site. They don't want to have anything to do with it. And that's often due to redevelopment costs, lack of infrastructure, poor soils, like Ali mentioned, toxics, and other elements that they just, or sometimes neighborhood opposition. So oftentimes the affordable housing is looking at those tough sites to solve the community problems and community issues, whether it's vacant retail. A problem site could even be a poor apartment building, or otherwise in a problem site. Brownsfields, et cetera, are all issues that we deal with on a regular basis. What we're also seeing is that affordable housing is leading master plan processes through entitlements for mixed income developments. This is actually another project that went through the disaster tax credit program and has started construction. This is the former Journey's End Mobile Home Park in Santa Rosa. It's 13.5 acres. It is going to include 162 senior housing units to replace what was previously the mobile homes. And then the rest will become market rate housing in a mixed neighborhood. But because of the tax credits, the senior housing got a nice site next to a park, et cetera, but it's also building the first initial street as part, and the infrastructure as part of the project, which is kind of an extra burden on top of a regular project, having to build all the streets and infrastructure. One of the things is that the market rate is probably going to be built at a lower density because of the structured parking, as you see in the bottom left-hand corner, will probably end up being more townhouses, and it's probably going to be more valuable at a lower density, while we were working towards trying to achieve a higher density for more housing, replacement housing for the community. This is what it is planned on looking like. This is when it went through the entitlements. The back building there will probably end up being more townhouses. It has a park, and it has the senior housing on the left. Kaiser is right next to it. And it's really going to be a great project overall. And it's started construction. The first 2 phases have been funded. The third phase will come a little later. I mentioned that nonprofits are doing a lot more of the master planning. That was led by the nonprofit team. This is actually Allie's project in Roseland, in the south part of Santa Rosa. And this has got everything about it. It's got the site with some toxics because of previous uses on the site that have to be cleaned up. It's an old retail center, which has to be redeveloped, and utilities that have to be built in. It will have an extensive amount of new improvements. The project that's been entitled includes the affordable housing on the yellow building on the left, market rate housing for mixed income on the right, a new public park, open space, a mercado for retail, commercial activity, and a civic building, and all the streets, et cetera, are also being built out by the county. So the affordable housing is one small piece of a bigger vision for a community hub. It's doing more for the community than just affordable housing. And MidPen took this project on a long time ago, and it's just now beginning to be realized after, Ali, you'll have to tell me, I think it's been at least 7 or 8 years, if not longer.
I think we ordered in 2016, maybe.
Yes, so 6 years for you, and others have probably been working on it for a little bit longer. But most private developers wouldn't be able to hold and continue on a project this long. And that's part of why having a nonprofit be part of the process is really what makes this project a reality. And it has all those elements that a community has asked for. It'll really become a community hub, mixed income, commercial, civic, open space, plazas and park. And that will really be a unique gem in southern Santa Rosa and the Roseland community. So we're looking forward to seeing that be realized starting up in the next year. I do have one development in Petaluma that's just starting to kind of be public. And this one is a little different, that it's not being driven by the affordable housing. It's not being led by the affordable housing developer. It's being led by market rate. It has an inclusionary component. And as Ali had mentioned, but rather than it being a for sale inclusionary, it will have an affordable development that's part of an overall market rate project that includes also commercial office, where the hotel is across the way, and other single family homes that are under construction. So this is part of a next phase of development, and it will be going through the entitlement process in Petaluma in the coming year. But that's another way. It's a freestanding affordable housing that fits within a single family townhome community. And we see those happening more and more as market rate developers team with nonprofits that can provide better management in the long-term management, and that makes them comfortable in having it be part of the overall development community, versus a lower percentage of housing that might be single family home ownership or duplex home ownership, but it will get a lot less affordability and a lot fewer units overall. So this is a project that will be going through the process in the next year. I just showed you a whole bunch of different types of developments at various scales, from 10 units up to 160 units. I mentioned that the sweet spot's around 50 to 75 units. I might have used an older Petaluma Arena number. I think it's a little bit different than Ali's, but I pulled it off the website for what the Arena numbers were coming up. And it is really what it's looking at is between the very low and low income. Those can really only be addressed specifically through the tax credit program and other public financing. And so if you think about that over, and make it a nice round number, well, if you have to do 500 units of affordable housing over 10 years, you basically have to be thinking about having a ribbon cutting every year for a 50 unit development. And so you really can't think about it as, well, we'll do one now and one later. You sort of always have to have 3 or 4 in the pipeline, because even that Novato development, which happened fairly quickly, from the time I get a phone call to say, look at a site, to a ribbon cutting, is 4 to 5 years. It really never happens any quicker than that. So if you think about that, you're always having to have 3, 4, 5 projects in the pipeline from concept to construction, so that you're basically not approving, you're having to approve a project every year, but you're also having to have a ribbon cutting every year to achieve your affordable housing goals based on the RHNA numbers. And so you need to be looking at not one type of development. You need to be looking at lots of different types as you're proceeding through, lots of different opportunities. Some will be teamed with market rate developers. Some are going to be individual affordable housing sites. Some are going to need to use the density bonus program and SB 35 to expedite their way through the process. And you're going to have to look at affordable housing in everybody's neighborhood, including yours. And then the city is going to have to be able to put their housing funds towards obtaining sites or looking at what sites the city or the state might have within their community, because the state is looking at all of their resources, all their land resources, to provide affordable housing in the future in all the communities throughout the state of California. And then really, while we would like affordable housing to solve all the world's problems, it really can't. It can solve a small portion of them for a few people. And what we really need to do is think about having lots of varied housing opportunities and lots of different developments proceeding along in their own pace, but all the time juggling all those as we're moving through the process. And we think that that is really the way to realize the best affordable housing for your community. And with that, we appreciate the opportunity to show all of these different ideas and issues, and love to answer any questions you might have. Allie would too.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I will try to come up with some on my own, which is going to be embarrassing, but we'll try anyway. First question is, one of the common complaints we hear about low parking ratios is, oh my God, there's going to be all sorts of spillover into neighborhoods and things like that. Can you speak to some of the developments that you've done and how the parking is actually worked out in those situations? Are all the spots filled, or do you end up with spillover, or yeah, how does that work?
Do you want to start, Allie, and I can, or would you like me to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can start just from a, common kind of operations and ownership standpoint. I think it is, like Rick alluded to, it is kind of site specific and project type specific. We always see that special needs residents and senior citizens need fewer cars than, say, a family, but also locating near, near grocery stores and near jobs and near high quality transit also alleviates the need for parking. And we've also done a lot, in every development we do now, we do secure bicycle storage. So really giving people the opportunity to easily transition from a car to a different mode of transportation really does help manage the parking. And then folks don't need to have, one or two cars per household. So we don't see neighborhood, parking spillover that folks are worried about in practice.
It's good to know that the theory actually plays out.
Yeah.
So
I'll just respond on that a little bit. And that we listen to property management really clearly on this issue, and all of our clients, their property managers, the last thing they want is a parking issue, because it's sort of after the fact and they can't solve it. A couple of the things, you hear the term unbundled parking. It really helps when you have a daytime use. You need enough parking at night for all the residents to park in when they're going to bed. But during the day is when you sometimes need more parking. But if you can unbundle them and not designate them for a particular unit, but that the people there all get a parking space or 1.5 parking spaces, and they register their cars, etc., but they don't actually have a dedicated parking space, you can actually get by with a little bit less parking. And so we've seen that borne out on multiple occasions. It's typically one of the first questions that communities ask. And in senior housing, in a suburban location that isn't that close to transit and stuff, we're usually at around 0.75 spaces per unit. But we're doing a project in my town about 3 blocks from my house, senior housing, 60 units, and we don't have any parking for the seniors. And but they're going to have very good transit access. So and they're right in downtown. So it does vary tremendously. And family housing, you really want to make sure that people that are working, these are working people, that they can get from their home to their jobs. And so parking is important, but I've never had a project ever really create any kind of major spillover parking issues in all the years that I've been designing projects and having them built. So I think that it's a big conversation that isn't usually, it doesn't turn out as people fear.
Right.
And one thing, maybe if I might add just one more parking thing, because I think we're all very, keyed in on parking, is, a lot of times we will hear from folks who live in neighborhoods where there are, really high housing costs. And so there are a lot more people or families in maybe a single family residence or something like that. It's not a professionally managed affordable housing complex or something like that. It's just many people are trying to make ends meet. So they're really living, many more people than were originally intended. And so then there's maybe 4, 5, 6 cars from this one, house or grouping of houses. So, that can actually create a lot more of a problem than providing the affordable housing with fewer parking spaces.
Mm-hmm. So now the questions have really rolled in. First one up is how does one make a brownfield site work? What are some of the challenges there?
Well, we have a number of them. I feel like I have a number of them right now, and we constantly have been dealing with them over time. So, and there's different types of brownfield sites, but the ones that we most often deal with is old parking lots of commercial retail centers or maintenance yards or something like that, where there's some oil that has been leached into the ground usually in certain specific locations. And those generally are cleaned up through very specific removal. There are other projects, and I have 2 of them right now that are old dry cleaners that really did create, or a gas station that had linking tanks where they had to clean up the soil. And in some of those instances, they always have to clean them up to be certified for residential development. We also create under slab, if there is residential on grade, and sometimes it's not, it's even above grade, above a parking podium, we will create under slab ventilation that gets pumped up and sent through to the sky, but way up high above the developments. So it is spread out thin. And so we've done, and those VIM designs are specially done and have to be certified, etc. We're doing a project in San Rafael in downtown, a couple blocks from my house, which has a couple of stories of senior center and then senior housing above, and we're doing a VIM system. But they've been working on that site now for 10 years to clean it up, and it's the BioMarin and Whistle Stop site, and so we've got lots of different types of things that we're having to clean up on those. But there are specialists that really focus on all of that. And scientifically, it has to be cleaned up before we're able to even consider, it has to be certified for residential development before it can even be considered for that.
And that generally gives you a discount from the cost of the land that works back in.
Yeah, usually whoever owned the land, by that time it's gone through a cost reduction to pay for the cleanup, so that whatever development it's going to have can occur.
For Rick, affordable housing by design, what role can micro apartments play?
So we are working on a variety of incredibly small apartment unit plans. But I'd say in general, because cost of construction is so expensive in the Bay Area, every client in MidPen actually has the best unit plan models. They have a really good design package that they say, this is our policies and the way we want to see things designed. MidPen's kind of the top of the group on this. Everybody is squeezing every square foot out of a residential apartment. One of the things is that the state is really focused on family housing. And so those micro units, which were very popular 2 or 3 years ago, kind of fell out of popularity with the last few funding rounds. But we're doing small, like 100-unit project where most of the units are studios that just finished construction in Mountain View. And then one of the things I'm doing is doing an old office building, renovating it for small studio apartments for formerly homeless. And those are, going to be 250 to 300 square foot apartments. We're doing a couple of projects that are old motels, and there's a new program for purchasing motels. You've heard about that. And they are being used for affordable housing, and they're being renovated to full micro units in some instances. And those units are in the 200 square foot, or less bracket. And so there's lots of those opportunities. One of the unique things is that every unit has a bathroom and a small kitchen. So it's actually, on a square foot basis, they're very expensive. But there is special funding for some of those. And we're doing a couple of motel projects. And then we're also doing a similar key project, home key project, which is purchase of a office building that's no longer functioning and renovating it for housing. It's being used as a homeless shelter currently, and it will eventually be permanent housing for formerly homeless individuals. But those are very, very small units. And those are successful, but they are not inexpensive to do.
But I also would guess that there's going to be a lot of commercial office building space coming up for repurposing in the near future.
We're thinking that might be the case, but we're not sure.
For Allie, there have been a bunch of recent stories about what communities weaponizing objective standards to push back on SB 35. Has MidPen had to deal with these yet?
No, we have not had to deal with anything like that yet. Like Rick said, the SB 35 projects that we've done, we've really done collaboratively with the community. So we have gone in and really made sure that we've complied with the objective zoning standards, met with the planners, and complied, not only to the letter, but in spirit with what the communities want. Another thing that SB 35 does not require is it doesn't require any kind of like public meetings that would be required as part of your planning commission or city council process. But on our project, like our project at 414 Petaluma, we held 3 community meetings to gather input on our designs from folks in the neighborhood before we even submitted for our approval package to the city. So, I think that it can be a really collaborative process, and hopefully communities won't be afraid of it and trying to look at it as an opportunity instead of something that is, punishment coming down from the state.
Yeah. And, we actually write objective design standards, and we're just finished writing them in Pleasanton, and we've written them and talk to the council about how do you promote smaller units, how do you promote affordable housing as part of the objective design standards, which is a change in politics. And there are a few cities that are weaponizing, but I would say overall, most of them are just trying to make sure that they have objective design standards and they're translating their design principles into it. And I usually don't find the objective design standards to be that difficult. It's usually, and there are lots of ways between concessions, waivers, etc., to achieve an affordable housing goal, even when there's objective design standards. There's a few instances, you've heard of Los Altos and a couple others down the South Bay, but my goal is to do a project in Ross someday, so I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. Couple on kind of construction. Well, one person's asking about alternative materials and methods, printed housing and modular units. And
Sure.
My impression is that the experimental stuff is experimental because it's more expensive, but if you've got any insight.
Well, we're, I don't know if MidPen has any experience with modular yet. We're doing a modular teacher housing development that is modular predominantly because the funders required it. We're getting some private funding on it. It's like, I don't, Facebook or one of those is putting money towards the project. But we're also working on other modular projects, and we haven't, the three selling points for modular are it's faster to build, it's less expensive to build, and it's a good quality. And it is definitely a good quality product. We know the people putting out for, say, Factory OS up in Vallejo. We haven't seen projects borne out yet to be less expensive. We think that the scale of modular has to ramp up even further to make that happen. There's not enough general contractors that know how to intertwine regular construction and modular. And then there's also just there's a certain amount of extra work that has to be done when you're focused on modular construction. But that's one, what we are starting to see more of is that we've seen a lot of modular building where they're prefabbing all the framing. That is pretty typical now. But what we are starting to see is prefabbing of the floor systems as well. So some of the framing that's going on is prefabbing floor systems. And so we're hoping to see that on Journey's End because we have a lot of laydown space. So hopefully that will occur there and expedite the construction process. But the framers are the ones that are trying to do that because labor is so costly and there's such a shortage of labor right now. That's something that they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. A question about on the materials thing again, or still a question about, is it possible to build for upgrading electrical vehicle charging where you're not putting in the big ass transformers now, but you're able to pull a cable and such later?
Well, we are doing that, and you do have to do a certain amount of it. The interesting thing is that basically PG&E says if you have to anticipate that if you're pulling conduit to it, that it will be there. So they're making you, even if you're only doing 10 out of 100 parking spaces, if you were to pre-wire 100 and say, well, we're not doing them all now, you still have to provide the transformer for the 100 vehicle charging stations. So even if they're not being included, pre-wiring. So, and that's a nuance that unfortunately they're planning, they don't want to have to change the transformer just because someone's moving a couple new charging stations in. That wouldn't make sense either. But it does make that lofty goal of having lots of charging stations very costly if you suddenly, and it takes a lot of juice to do a charging station. And so that's a little bit of a problem that there's certain problems that you have to just realize there's got to be a workaround, and right now there just isn't one.
Some questions about specific regional stuff. What's the elevation of the project over there behind Hopper Street that the last one you showed us, that yeah, kind of in the riverfront?
When you say elevation, how many stories or
no, I think the concern is about sea level rise in that area.
Oh, so there's an example of where the other half of the development team is leading that. So that will be a good question when we start having public comments and public questions. Because I don't have it off the top of my head. I would say it wrong, but I can tell you that everybody is concerned with it, and floodplains are something that everybody is trying to address as part of their developments.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, running down, when you talk about the market not wanting low parking ratios or other building attributes, who is the market? I think of the buyer or renter as being the market, but how can they have an informed opinion when the project has not been realized? Chicken and egg there, I suppose.
Well, let's say if someone is, and this is the difference between rental and for sale. A developer who's doing a for sale project is more sensitive to his buyer, because I've, with all relative due to the missing middle conversation which you will be having, I'm good friends with Dan and like what he's doing with that. I still feel that generally speaking, the private development community tries to get the highest dollar amount they can for every unit that they're selling. So they know that if someone is buying a house and thinking of it as a long-term investment, they're thinking of living there for the next 20 years. They may not want to be hamstrung by a single car garage or a single parking space. Maybe it's a one-car garage and another parking space, but they want to know that they can put two cars there because maybe it's taken them two incomes to buy that house, and they have two people working and they have to both get to work, and maybe transit in that location isn't quite as good. So I think the better transit is, the closer you are to SMART, closer you are to your job is to where the transit is. But you don't want to get, if you're going to buy into a neighborhood and you're going to live there for the next 20 years, you don't necessarily want to be hamstrung later on. So that's their perspective on the market. I think renters are more flexible and they self-select. And when you're doing affordable housing, I think the self-selection is the rent. And they can be a little more flexible on their cars and parking as long as they can get to their job and make that extra effort. But if you're at the high end of the market, then you find that the higher the income levels, generally speaking, and there are exceptions to this, the higher the parking ratios end up wanting to be from the development community.
And one other kind of aspect I'd add to that is on specifically market rate, either rental or for sale. The developers are going to go out and get loans or try and get equity and raise investment. And those investors or banks are going to do a market study. And those market studies look at what is the product that's offered in that market area, what amenities do they have, how many parking spaces do they have, and what's selling. And so if there is not existing product with kind of less parking or whatever, the bank is determining what they think that the market is before they're going to lend that money or invest that money. So I think it is can be uninformed, right? Like, just because it's not there doesn't mean there's no demand for it. It's just that it hasn't been built. So it certainly is a chicken and egg.
What top few things would you could City of Petaluma officials do to make things better for higher density housing?
I'll say that the thing that I find is when cities can help bring land to the table, because having control of land is the thing with affordable housing. And I'm talking as a designer, so I'm taking Allie's part here a little bit. But if they can help find or gain control of properties in key locations, and that is in a neighborhood that has a good school, in a higher income portion of the neighborhood, in an area that's near grocery stores and amenities, that's near transit, that will, all of those attributes will help gain funding and help gain not only tax credit funding, but other types of funding. So to the extent that cities can think of their resources and focus them in those kinds of places to gain land control and negotiate with a private developer or a property owner to do that. And then, and you know, I realize we're talking with a community group here, but your council and planning commission have to listen intently to them, but also realize that there's a lot of fear about affordable housing, although I'm seeing less and less and less of it in community processes and community meetings than I used to. We're getting a lot more support in communities, and a lot of people are coming in to council hearings and saying we want more affordable housing in our community. The rubber meets the road when it's an actual site and a building in their neighborhood, and then at that point the council really needs to say, you know, this is what we have, and we need 5 of these, and we need one in every neighborhood, not just in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. We need them in all the neighborhoods. And I'm going through that right now in Mill Valley, where the neighborhoods are actually accusing the city of and this was in the newspaper, so it's been public, that they're basically saying you're pitting neighborhood against neighborhood. We're all trying to push the affordable housing into the other neighborhood, and then we'll all support it, except for the neighborhood that gets it. And my suggestion was, why don't you do 5 projects and do one in every neighborhood? That went over really well too. But that is sort of the challenge, is having a political backbone and then gaining the sites and then being supportive of a well-designed project, because I think all the nonprofit, MidPen does a great job in listening to the neighborhood, listening to the community, and trying to achieve a balance between a successful, feasible development and meeting the community's needs and desires. And so listening and keeping an open mind is really a positive thing.
Yes. Cool.
Yeah, and I agree with Rick on the land piece. I think, you know, you've heard us talk about parking so many times, but certainly, you know, not high parking ratios or no minimum parking requirements certainly would drive density. And then, you know, impact fees are another place that are quite expensive, especially when it's by, you know, impact fee for sewer or water or whatever by unit rather than by size of unit. I think that is changing now, but, you know, really making impact fees are very expensive, and they're, you know, 10% or something of our project cost. So it's not a small amount. And, you know, obviously cities have to fund their infrastructure and, you know, their city operations, but it really adds up for development.
As we've noted in a couple of these forums, if you have to fund everything by impact fees, that means that 30 years later, when maintenance costs on it come due, we're all hosed. Dave notes that the Scannell project on Hopper, which I think is part of that riverfront development, is going to the Planning Commission next week, if people are interested in that. And the final question I have here is, what kind of, there's a bunch of specific calling out salaries, and they don't look that far out of line for Bay Area salaries. But how does administrative overhead impact the cost of affordable housing? My guess is that some of these numbers that people are looking at and going, oh my God, are spread out over enough units that it just doesn't really register relative to parking. But speak to that a little bit, maybe.
I need clarity on the question.
Well,
what do you mean
specific
administrative
was,
overhead?
well, the specific was the salaries of affordable housing executives. Which, yeah, that's the question. The numbers posted to me don't look that far out of line, but yeah, I mean, is it just that I suspect that if you've got somebody making $200,000, even $400,000 a year, they're managing enough new units per year that works out to peanuts per unit. It just doesn't matter. But the question was asked, so I had to raise it.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that the affordable housing projects all kind of exist on their own. So each affordable housing project has to find its own financing and it has to support itself. So it's not paying money back to the affordable housing developer for those kind of salaries. Affordable housing development usually kick off of maybe $2 million roughly of developer fee to the corporation, but that's for, like Rick said, like 4 or 5 years of work, which is all the overhead of the accountants, the project managers, the executives, for everybody. So yeah, I think that the salaries are probably in line with the salaries of the Bay Area, but they're not being borne out by the residents who are living at the affordable housing project.
Okay, cool. Yeah, 1 or 2 more details that I think we'll follow up with later, because we don't need to dive into the weeds of sizing conduits for electrical projects.
Oh, we could.
I'm sure we could go all night. I'll try to grab Neil or get Neil to email me, and maybe I'll send you a follow-up question.
Sure.
We'll do with that later. Yeah, but we've been going for an hour and a half. Well, longer for those of us who were here earlier. So thank you very, very much, Ali and Rick, for your time. Really appreciate it. Any final closing words?
I'm going to let Ali have the last word, so I'm going to go first. And I'm just going to say, Petaluma is a really fantastic community. And my sister-in-law lives there with her family. I've always really enjoyed it. I think it's a great place to live. And you've really done a lot of fantastic things with your downtown. You were set the stage and planning for urban growth boundaries early on in the planning world. There's a lot of great thinking that goes on in Petaluma and a lot of great leaders. And I think that you have some challenges around cost and vision, which most communities have, and you should have a strong vision and a high vision, and then you should also realize, as my town in San Rafael is having to realize also, is that change can be a good thing, and putting it under glass and not changing usually ends up not being the best solution. So as you change and develop things in the community, and I appreciate all of the supportive people that have come to affordable housing proposals and supported projects. And what you find is there's a lot of really hardworking people that are trying to make these a reality. And then there's also a lot of great citizens in your town that really do want to support affordable housing. And we appreciate it when you come out and support it at Planning Commission and Council, because there's a lot of work and thought that goes behind those things. And we do listen to you when you make comments in a community meeting. And then we have seen a overwhelming groundswell of support for affordable housing in communities up and down the 101, and we appreciate it. But Petaluma has some really special identity, And I think everybody wants to retain that and allow it to mature. And I'm hoping that everyone will allow affordable housing to be a part of it, because it's a real important part of your community. Ally?
I think the only thing else, I think well said, Rick, and thanks. I think I love Petaluma so much that I decided to move here after starting to work here on our 414 Petaluma project. So, I mean, I'm so impressed by the city, the vision of the city council. And I just think that there's a lot of opportunity. So I'm looking forward to seeing where we go from here. And so thanks everybody for having us and for being interested in affordable housing and housing along the spectrum for folks.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. I will get the recording up as soon as I can and process it. And with that, I will let you all get on with your evening. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Cool. Good night.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.